KEP. Thank you, Shane. So Jeff had a question about the KEP. I wanted to also provide an update about where we are. I pinged Michelle yesterday and she said she'll take a look at the KEP again. But Jeff has been reviewing it as well. And one of the questions he had was about using brownfield buckets. We tried to open I just tried to open the GitHub page for it. It's a little slow. So I ended up just opening it up locally. And we'll just quickly go over how we do brownfield buckets. So to kind of bring the context back, so we decided we'll call the resources for creating a bucket as bucket claim, and we don't have any bucket access requests or bucket requests anymore. It's just like PVCs, persistent volume claims, and PVs. So you have bucket claims and buckets, and then to get access, we just have one object called bucket access. So in case of greenfield buckets or buckets that we create fresh, new, we create a bucket claim, and that ends up calling the appropriate functions in Cozy to create the bucket itself. And in case of brownfield buckets or existing buckets, we expect the admin to create a bucket object manually, and we have the bucket access. This is the object that the user creates to gain access to a bucket, and we have this directly point to the bucket. That's pretty much it. I think this sentence.
Well, there's some, you're saying you don't need a bucket claim for brownfield then, right?
Right.
And so the KEP doesn't say that right now. And I'm looking at my comments, and I'm looking at a comment from Blaine and thoughts. Saying similar. It looks like there's several way back, even in September, there's a comment on that.
We can fix, we can fix the wording. Is more importantly the design. Am I missing something that you're seeing?
Yeah, what I'm gonna I'll make some wording suggestion changes around brownfield now that I have heard definitively that a bucket claim is not needed for the brownfield use case. So I will now, knowing that now, I will review some of my own comments and some of those paragraphs. And Sid, I'll just make some suggestions for wording that will make it clearer.
For sure.
At least for me, it would make it clear.
For sure, yeah. No, I appreciate that, and we'll incorporate it. So
and otherwise, I still need to review more. And your point at the beginning of the meeting is correct that a lot of my comments would just be considered nits. They're syntax or grammar or something like that. I just, when I go through it, I just sort of look at everything. So that's kind of how the way I do reviews. But I will also try to spend some time to think of the more deeper issue that this will meet all our intended use cases. It seems like it will to me.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, we appreciate the review, Jeff. So yeah, do it your style. Okay, so really the one thing that's really left to address is reference policy. But before that, before we jump into a new discussion, I wanted to ask, so we really want to get this kept through. We really want to move things along. I know Michelle's going to take a look, but what else can we do? So who can help with, so I'm just looking for ideas of what can we do to push this along faster? Like, should we just keep pinging Michelle, or is there someone else also? What should, like, I want to come up with some plan of how we address this. Let's just assume that, the KEP is in a decent state, like ready to be reviewed. Maybe not perfect yet, but ready to be reviewed. How do we take this forward?
Yeah, I think that we should pin Michelle because I know I pinned her before holiday, but she's already on vacation, right? So now she just came back. So just pin her. She says she will review it.
Yeah. Okay.
And then she can, because I think Tim has already, I think you can also still pin Tim as well.
Okay.
But then, after Michelle reviewed it, Michelle can also pin Tim. So I think this one also still need the API reviewer to approve. So
okay, understood. Okay, so Michelle first, and then Tim second. Is that what you're saying?
right, but I think you can just pin both of them. You don't have to kind of wait, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Because the team also you have already addressed his comments, right?
We have, yeah.
Yeah, so also pin him.
Mm-hmm.
But I think
Okay.
Michelle says she wants to review this one, so yeah.
Yeah, I spoke with. I mean, I sent her a Slack message yesterday, and she said she'll take a look. So yeah, I was just wondering if there's anything else we can do, like have some other reviewer take a look so it's easier for Michelle or something like that.
I think Michelle is the one who is going to, because she's kind of helping Sad, right? Sad was initially going to review this, and then Michelle says she is taking over the side.
Okay.
So
okay.
So I wonder. So I see that. Is it Dejo? Do you also work with Michelle? Let's see. Anyway, never mind. Not sure if she's listening. So that's okay. So let's just pin Michelle. Oh, hey.
Sorry, hi, Xin. Sorry, I'm driving.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm on the road. Yeah. So, do you have a question? Like.
Do you work with Michelle?
Yes, I work with Michelle.
Okay, so are you also going to review this cap? Or is it Michelle going to do this?
I can check with Michelle. So I think I'm not. I'm a new join. So
I see. Okay.
So I might not. I can take a look, but I might not be able to like officially.
Oh, I see. So maybe you can help us pin Michelle to review this then. Just because we.
Yeah.
I think she knows that as well. Yeah.
Sure,
this cap has been there for a while that we really want to get it in 1.24, right? So I think she knows that. Just if you can ping her, I know she's very busy. Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll ping Michelle on it. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you. All right. So, any other topics that anyone thinks we need to address? If not, we can jump into reference policy. Okay, so reference policy. So the sentence here, the what I'm sharing here itself kind of points to what we need to address. Currently, there's no mechanism to restrict which users can get access to which bucket. We said that within a namespace, anyone can access any bucket if it was created by someone in that namespace. There are no restrictions within the namespace. We're using namespace as that boundary. Now, across namespaces, we want to set up this boundary where there should be some mechanism to ensure that people who want to gain access to a bucket in a different namespace should only do so if they've explicitly been granted permissions to do it. And that's when we stumble into this idea of reference policy. It's where you can define a policy which says these are the resources, which defines what resources you can refer to from another resource. So for instance, what kind of or which buckets can be referred to by a new bucket claim or by a new bucket access. It can be defined in the reference policy. So let me open up. I believe we had a document on this at one point. Let me see if I have that still. Was it here? Yeah, there it is. So this is kind of how we defined a reference policy will look like. So we said, I'm just going over this again after a long time. So just bear with me while I try to figure out what I've done here. So what we've said here is from resources bucket access in namespace Alice, you can refer to another resource in a different namespace. Yeah, that's pretty much it. It's pretty straightforward. Is this, does anyone, Ben, do you remember where we left off this conversation?
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Where we left it off, we
I'm trying to remember. Something
we
tells me.
decided to not do this in the alpha version, and we had
Right.
convinced ourselves that there was a way to do it eventually. I don't know if, I mean, I remember that the version of the reference policy we were looking at a couple months back was like not done, like it was a proposal or something.
Yeah.
Is it the case now that like reference policies are officially supported or usable in some form?
No, it's still the
So,
same.
I mean, I don't know how we can implement anything until there's something to implement on top of, and I'd be very nervous about delving too deep, while they might still change something on us, unless we want to like go get involved in that community and talk, make suggestions about how they should design the reference policy or something.
No, so we've already gotten in touch with SIG, and we're gonna go ahead with our own implementation of reference policy, and then they're gonna take.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I think we had talked about this. So we're not going to piggyback. We're going to re-implement it.
Yep.
The way we want, with an eye towards maybe someday, possibly, probably not, merging the two. Yeah.
Yeah, probably not. But coming back to this.
So my concern with, if we're going to go off and develop our own thing, then the way that the original reference policy was sketched out was significantly more complicated than what we needed, right? Because we don't need any type information or any of that kind of stuff, because it's all inferred, right? We know what the referent type is and what the referee type is, and it's just a matter of putting some names in an object, and it's a namespace, right, that says this.
Okay,
buckets.
That's interesting. So you're saying
we could if it's an object just for us, we could simplify it dramatically and just have a few fields that express what we actually care about. And then if the real reference policy that eventually emerges is significantly more flexible, and then either we can map onto it, in which case we do, or we can't, in which case we stick with our simple thing that works. But I wouldn't attempt to design the complicated thing on their behalf when they're not even done yet. I would just say, okay, all the reference policy needs to tell you is the namespace and the bucket.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Or the
simpler is better.
Yeah. Just the namespace and the bucket. And the only question then is, if you wanted to grant access to multiple namespaces, like should you have multiple objects, or should one object have an array in it somewhere? We could sort that out.
Yeah, so we can just call it bucket reference policy instead of a generic reference policy. And it basically just defines what namespaces can access what buckets. That's it.
Yeah, well, the question is, when you want to grant multiple access to multiple namespaces to a single bucket, or multiple buckets to a single namespace, do you do that with one very large reference policy, or by lots of little reference policies?
I prefer the way of doing lots of little reference policies.
Yeah. So in that case, then nothing should be a vector, right? They should all be scalars. It should just be one namespace, one bucket name, per object. You create the object, and if you want to grant more access, you create more objects. So you only need 2 fields, I think,
Yeah.
in the world.
Do we have to? Yeah, this is where it gets. I don't want to complicate it, but maybe it's worth just thinking about whether we should also define what kind of access is possible. Or
Oh,
maybe not.
you mean like an access? Did we have access classes in our earlier draft? I'm
Yeah, we still
looking
do.
where.
Bucket access class.
I mean, in the reference policy draft, we weren't contemplating putting access classes here, right? The reference
I think
policy was an all or nothing thing.
Yeah, so I think we did. So do you mean in the references? You mean?
Right, we weren't contemplating like giving a reference policy that says you can use read only but not write, for example. If
Right.
assuming you had 2 bucket access classes, one for read only and one for write, the theory was when you give someone when you create one of these reference policies, it's all or nothing.
Yeah.
And that's simpler, to be honest. I don't know if.
Yeah, you're right. There's no point. Yeah.
I mean, it would be nice to say like this guy has read-only access, but the problem is that you have to put the bucket access class name in the reference policy, and the meaning of a bucket access class can change over time, right? If someone changes the bucket access, and so it's like from a security perspective, it's kind of like standing on sand. You know, you could sink in if someone changes something underneath you. It doesn't seem like a good way to do security.
I mean, the definition of bucket access. I mean, it doesn't matter, to be honest. I think it's better to go this route where we don't define reference or bucket access classes for a reference. I think it's better that way. You're right. So
okay, so we'll keep it all or nothing, which means you only need the 2 fields, which is the target namespace and the source bucket.
Yep.
And then the whole thing gets a lot simpler.
That's right. And I think it's better to go with there's no need to complicate it right now. Let someone come and ask us for that specific feature, and we'll do it at that point. I don't yeah, there's no need to complicate it yet.
I mean, it would be good to know, like if we have a goal to eventually merge with someone else's reference policy, how we'll perform that mapping at that future time, so that we can convince ourselves that that door remains open. But
the gateway folks, I think they abandoned the idea of reference policy. They're doing it a different way now.
Oh no. Well, what are they doing? I mean, is the new thing better? I mean, ultimately, all of this is to please SIG-auth, right?
Yeah.
So if they can, maybe SIG-auth convince them to do something different, and they're going to tell us the same thing.
Yeah, concepts. Yeah, see, you can't even refer to it directly anymore. Yeah, they don't have reference policy anymore.
What do they have instead?
But if you look at it actually still has this diagram. It's like shared. It's still somewhere there's the diagram. So I was trying to figure out how the API look like. Yeah, you see this one, right? There's a info namespace shared. You see this? See this one?
Yeah.
Shared by the 2 namespace. Shared gateway.
How it works. The route needs an entry in its parent refs field referencing the gateway.
One listener on the gateway needs the attachment.
Parent refs. Well, that's an interesting idea. So that's basically a fan out back pointer kind of a field on your object.
Yeah, so they have, this is kind of what we talked about, and we thought was not a good idea. So they have this option of the sharing is defined up front. Same namespace is the default option. Only routes in the same namespace as this gateway may be attached. All is all namespaces, and selector is based on namespace selectors. I wonder why they went to this approach.
Well, mutability always creates race conditions and weird problems. So maybe they just wanted to get rid of mutability.
But selectors are mutable.
Not if the selector is like defined up front, right? You could say when you know, the equivalent on our side would be if we forced you to list the namespaces that the bucket could be shared with when you created the bucket, or supply the selector that would be used to enforce that when you created the bucket, then we could just encode that directly into the bucket, and then it would be immutable, right? That at that point, only those namespaces could ever access the bucket, and or only namespaces that matches the selector could. And then if you change your mind later, you're out of luck, or you need an administrator to come hack your object or something. But
or edit the namespaces, right? Or edit the namespaces. Oh, you mean as the user? Fair enough. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, normal people can't edit namespaces, so
yeah.
I mean, you could imagine a scheme like that, where so then at that point, for the bucket's whole lifetime, the question of whether a given bucket access can bind to it or not can't change, right? It's well, I guess in a selector, someone can modify the namespace. I don't know.
So it looks like routes attached to gateways. So
yeah.
The route needs an entry in the parameters field referencing the gateway, and then at least one listener on the gateway needs to allow this attachment. And to allow it, you need to have one of these things matching.
Yeah.
Apparently, there are also kinds of routes. Actually, this it kind of translates decently well into what we do also. This could be like kinds of access, and this could be like the actual namespaces that have access to a particular bucket. What I want to figure out is why they went with this route instead of doing the reference policy. We need to get in touch with them.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, we shouldn't be running off on our own. If SIG-Auth has an opinion, we should figure out what SIG-Auth's opinion is. We should figure out why they made this change and try to get to the bottom of, is there a better way? Because the reference policies had some advantages, but it's also feels extra complicated to have another object for this strange use case. Not a strange use case. I mean, like, it's a use case that we expect to be reasonably common, and to like introduce a whole new object just to address it, always felt a little odd.
How is this different from the original idea that we had, where we talked about encoding in some sort the namespaces that will have access to this bucket, and there was a problem with that approach too.
Well, the problem was that it could only be modified by the administrator. We never created a scheme to upfront at bucket creation time say, I want to share my bucket with Alice if I'm Bob, or vice versa. Whereas they seem to have done that. We were always assuming that this was something you would do after the fact. You would go create your bucket, and then later you would realize you wanted to share it. And at that point, because these objects are immutable, you couldn't do anything without an administrator. But if you're willing to specify it all up front, that creates ways to solve it.
Okay, so the difference between them and us is gateways are admin controlled entirely. From what I'm reading, I don't think a gateway can be defined by a user. So the admin gets to create the gateway with these parameters up front. So the admin would know what are the other namespaces. The admin would know, just they'll have full view into the cluster. Whereas in our case, the bucket is created by a bucket user who creates a bucket claim, and a user doesn't know, like wouldn't know just what's out there and who to give access.
So you could take the view that for buckets that are meant to be shared across multiple namespaces, like those are going to be the responsibility of the administrator. The administrator should create a special shared bucket namespace, put all the shared buckets there, and then set up whatever needs to be set up to give everyone access to those shared buckets. And then for people who create their own buckets in their own namespaces, like those ones can't be shared. Like you could look at it that way, and just say this is an admin problem. And ordinary users can do self-service, but they can't do self-service sharing. I think we had been presumed, we had been going along the lines of we want two individual users to just be able to collaborate by creating a bucket and then sharing it. But I don't know if that really exists in the Kubernetes world. Like I don't, I can't think, huh?
You're right, actually, yeah. If you're sharing it across namespaces, getting an admin involved is probably the right thing to do. And I don't think any other resources work any other way. You have to get the admin involved. Like, I mean, except if it's a service or something.
Potentially. I mean, the thing is, in the storage world, we have been talking about these weird, namespace transfers for things like PVCs and snapshots that don't require an administrator, because we somehow thought that was an important thing to do. And what I don't know is, are there people out there who are like sharing a Kubernetes cluster but not sharing namespaces and talking to each other and wanting to collaborate? Like, is that a thing that happens, or is it just the case that people who work together are in the same namespace?
Services do that. Like services already do that. You can address a DNS names. I mean, you can address a service in a different namespace by service name dot namespace dot rest of the FQDN.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm trying to think of a real world situation where you have a Kubernetes cluster and a bunch of users that kind of don't trust each other, but still need to interact a little bit. And so they have their own namespaces, and then you can share services across namespaces, and presumably there's some out of band communication where you become aware of them. But like for data storage, is it the same? Maybe it is. I guess I could be convinced either way.
No, I think, see, if that's the case, what it really means is we can go either way, basically, and we can define how we want our system to work.
Yeah, I mean, we've always had that freedom, but we don't want to design for the situation that doesn't really exist.
Agreed.
Which is why I'm nervous about,
allowing users to define upfront who gets
well,
access.
I'm nervous about spending a bunch of our time, trying to design that when it might not be something anyone cares about. The more important thing is the self-service use case and the admin creating a shared one use case, and then maybe a distant third is two ordinary users collaborating with each other.
So I think one of our requirements was I think we said something like buckets are meant to be shared. You can pretty much assume that someone from another namespace is going to want to get access to the bucket.
I look at it differently. My assumption is, if you want to share data, buckets are a uniquely good way to do that. But there's going to be a lot of buckets where you have no intention of sharing.
So generally, in any big data workload that kind of sends data to object storage, there's a separate set of services that push data in, and there's a separate set that actually process it. I'm looking at like one common use case that we see with Minio deployments.
Yeah, but like you could easily imagine that you just put all the services in one namespace, and that's your application.
Fair enough. Okay, so let's do this then. Let's talk to these guys at Gateway API and find out why they've gotten, why they've moved on from the reference policy approach. And I'll also look into how people deploy Minio and see if they're in the same namespace or not. I don't think it matters as much, but it's worth knowing. Curious anyways. Because I think we can keep going in circles, but I feel like we don't have enough information to really understand why it was done this way. We can, and then the open question still remains. Should the user be able to set up or define who gets to use which bucket, or is it the admin who does this? I mean, there's another question that kind of comes along the way when you ask that question, which is how many buckets are going to be there? If there's going to be lots, something that's going to tax the admin a lot, then it's reasonable to say the user should be able to do it. But I don't think that's generally the case.
No, there may be lots of buckets there, but there'll probably be very few that would be shared.
That would, yeah.
Right.
That
So
still means the
that's-
admin. Mhm.
the way they're doing it here seems to make sense for that. A user would choose whether they don't want it to be shared, they want it to be shared with all, or they want it to be shared with a select group that is known. And then if there's a new group that comes along or a new namespace that comes along, then the admin would have to get involved to add that namespace as an option, right? I don't think that's too much to ask. I don't think that's a problem, right? Because you're talking probably very limited times when an admin would have to get involved to add a new namespace to be selectable or to modify the bucket or namespace so that it could share that bucket.
Okay, so our self-service is limited to within the namespace.
Or all, right? Or the selection that they know of at that time, at the time of creating the bucket.
Yeah.
And if you in that one-off use case or whatever, that a new namespace comes along that you want to share a bucket with, an admin would have to get involved to modify the namespace, either modify the namespace or modify the selector list so that that new namespace could be added.
But even if we accept this proposal, it involves changing the way that you define buckets, right? Because now we have to have a field that does that, which we don't have today.
Right, we would have to add this namespace selection.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, we're redefining the scope, but it seems like a better approach, at least upfront.
Yeah, I see this page is still here.
Yeah, the page is still there actually. Yeah.
What does that mean? I mean, I don't know.
We can't get access to it. Like under reference, I don't see a reference here.
Okay, you're saying they just stopped and then abandoned Alpha 2?
There's no links to it. I think they just left the old pages as it is. So it's probably hosted on GitHub.
Yeah, we probably need to ask them what does that mean? It's pretty strange.
Yeah. So they still have their original implementation, like original idea listed out here.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah, but I like what we're talking about. What we're saying is we're not aiming for 100% self-service. It is self-service as long as you define upfront who all gets access to your bucket. But if you need changes beyond that, you get an admin involved. And okay, so then comes the question of who all can you allow to access this bucket. So let's say I'm user foo and I'm working in namespace foo. Should I allow anyone in the entire cluster, or should I be able to say anyone from the cluster can access my bucket? Is it like, in the sense, isn't foo kind of super privileged now?
Well, it means anybody can, or I don't see a problem with that, right? You could have a bucket that could be shared by anyone in the cluster.
Or I meant more like, should there be a restriction on who foo lets the bucket be shared with?
No.
Yeah, I think either answer is okay. I think this is probably simpler. The no is probably simpler because in terms of implementation also it's going to be tricky, and even the requirement of having to restrict who gets access or who can foo allow is also tricky. Okay, I'm fine with that. Something makes me apprehensive about, like, we've discussed this for a long time, and I'm wondering if there's something we missed when we just discussed this idea right now.
I think it was that we were apprehensive about having admins have to get involved, that we wanted it to be completely self-service. And I think that has kept us from getting where we need to be, right? We keep going in circles.
Right.
So I think for an alpha, this doing it the way they're doing makes sense to me, and it's quick, it's easy, and it's explicit. Like, you know what's going on. You don't have to worry about how many reference policies there are.
Yep. Yeah, this is actually simpler and it's cleaner. I like this approach. We have simplified the scope here for sure. All right, so next steps.
But we got to get Sidhartha on board.
Wait, sorry.
Yeah, I think we
though?
need to find out if this was done because of SIGAuth, or if this is, or they're realizing that reference policies would be too cumbersome, right? And they have not dealt with SIGAuth yet.
Wait, why do we have to deal with SIGAuth at all, since we're not going the reference policy route?
Well, for the same reason we engaged with them originally, because we're implementing an object sharing scheme and we wanted their opinion.
Okay. I just thought of it as we're not creating any new resources, we're just working with what we have. But fair enough.
I mean, what was it? Was it Tim that steered us towards them? I thought one of the
Yeah, it was
reviewers
Tim.
said, like, you need to talk to SIGAuth.
It
And
was
so
Tim.
that hasn't changed.
No, that's not what happened. So Tim wanted us to talk to the gateway team to figure out how they've solved this problem, to understand how they've solved this problem. Not as much as talk to them and get their approval.
Well, okay.
Yeah. I like this, actually. It's simpler. I like this approach. But I still want to talk to SIGAuth or these guys at Gateway API, figure out why they've gone with this approach. Obviously, it's simpler. That's one answer, but I still want to find out.
Yeah,
All right,
and
so
maybe ask them if they think the immutability of this would be a problem, or they perceive, or if they've thought about that as a problem.
yeah, will do. The gateway is always maintained by an admin, so it's not. So the admin defines the namespaces up front. There's no user involved in that in defining these things.
Well, if you wanted flexibility, you would use the selector scheme and then put like labels on namespaces and do it that way, and you get your flexibility. But if you did pick a static listed namespaces, it's not clear that an admin could modify that list. Maybe he can, maybe he can't. Depends on admission controllers and stuff.
Right. But he would have to modify the selector if a namespace was created with the wrong selector to be able to share a bucket.
Mm-hmm. All right. Okay, so I'll follow up with the SIGAuth and Gateway API, and I'll find out why it was done this way. That's all I have for today. I want to start implementing this. I want to start writing code. I think since we've been kind of going back and forth, we've kind of just fallen back on just having something to show. So I'm just going to start writing some code and having something that's demoable. Well, it might not be fully flushed out or production quality. It should be demo ready at least. I think the way we can start showing it to people, and even proving that some of our designs work. And while implementing, we might even run into some issues that we didn't foresee. So I'm just gonna I'm announcing it here, because if there's anyone here who wants to contribute, or anyone here who knows someone who can contribute, please put them in touch with me. That's all I have.
All right, thanks, Sid.
Yeah, thanks
Thank
everyone.
you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.